The gun was still in his hand when he walked through her gate, and the blood on his shirt wasn't his own. That was the first thing Clara Whitfield noticed about the stranger who stumbled onto her land that October morning, 3 years after the war had ended but never really left the men who fought it. He was tall, hollow-cheeked, and moving like a man who hadn't slept in days, and when he finally stopped in front of her porch, he didn't ask for water or food or shelter. He asked for work. "Give me a job on your farm," he said, his voice cracked and low. "I'll do anything. I just need somewhere to be." Clara stood there with a shotgun of her own resting against the doorframe, studying him the way she studied a storm on the horizon, trying to decide if it would pass or if it would take the roof off her house. And then she said the words that would change both their lives forever. "I don't need a cowboy on this farm, mister. I need a husband. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that broken people can find each other and build something whole out of the pieces, then stay with us, because this is a story you won't forget." And before we go further, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Golden Outlaw Tales, because we tell stories that remind us kindness still walks this earth. His name was Jesse Calloway, and he hadn't meant those words to land the way they did. He'd meant to laugh them off, to explain that he wasn't the marrying kind, that he was a drifter who'd buried too many friends and couldn't stay in one place long enough to plant roots. But Clara wasn't joking. Her husband, Thomas, had died 2 winters back, thrown from a horse while trying to save a calf caught in a flooded creek, and since then the bank had been circling her land like a vulture waiting for her to fail. She had 120 acres, a barn with a leaking roof, 2 children who needed a father, and a debt that grew heavier every month she couldn't pay it. What she needed wasn't a hired hand who'd work for wages and leave when the season ended. She needed a man who would stay, who would put his name next to hers on the deed, who would give the bank no reason to take what was left of her family's future. She said it plainly, without shame, because desperation strips away the luxury of pretending. Jesse almost walked away that day. He told her he wasn't fit to be anybody's husband, that the war had hollowed him out and left him with nightmares instead of dreams, that he'd bring her more trouble than help. But then he saw her children peering out from behind the curtains, a boy of about 7 and a girl no older than 5, both of them thin in a way that spoke of skipped meals, both of them watching him with the same careful hope their mother wore on her face. And something in Jesse, some ember he thought the war had smothered for good, refused to let him turn and ride away. So he agreed, not to love her, not yet, but to marry her as a matter of survival, a contract between 2 people who needed each other more than they needed anything resembling romance. The wedding was small and quiet, held on the porch with a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through, and there was no music, no dancing, no joy in the traditional sense, only 2 tired people making a promise they weren't sure they could keep. That night, Jesse slept in the barn, and Clara lay awake in the house wondering if she'd made the worst mistake of her life, marrying a stranger with blood still crusted under his fingernails. But morning came, and Jesse was already up before dawn, mending the fence that had been falling apart since Thomas died, and something about the sight of him working without being asked, without complaint, settled something in her chest she hadn't realized was so tightly wound. The weeks that followed were not easy. Jess's nightmares woke the whole house some nights, his screams echoing across the fields until Clara learned to sit with him until the shaking stopped, saying nothing, just being present the way you'd sit with a frightened animal. The children were wary of him at first, especially the boy, Daniel, who had loved his father fiercely and resented this stranger taking his place at the table. There were harsh words some evenings, moments where Jesse nearly packed his bag and left, certain he was doing more harm than good. But Clara never let him go. She'd stand in the doorway some mornings, arms crossed, and remind him that a promise made in front of God and a traveling preacher wasn't something you broke because things got hard. Farms didn't run on comfort, she told him. Neither did families. Slowly, painfully, something began to shift. Jesse started fixing things nobody had asked him to fix, not just the fence but the well pump, the loose porch step, the hinge on the barn door that had squeaked for 2 years. He taught Daniel how to whittle a slingshot, patient in a way that surprised them both, and one evening the boy laughed at something Jesse said, a real laugh, and Clara had to turn away so they wouldn't see her crying at the kitchen window. The daughter, little May, took to him even faster, climbing into his lap during supper and falling asleep against his chest while he told her stories about the mountains he'd seen out west, stories that had no war in them at all, only wonder. And Clara herself began to change too, though she fought it. She found herself watching for him at the end of each day, feeling something loosen in her shoulders when she saw him walking back from the fields, dust on his boots and sun on his face. She caught herself smiling at small things, at the way he hummed off-key while repairing the chicken coop, at the gentle way he handled the animals despite the violence he carried inside him from the war. One evening, as they sat together on the porch after the children had gone to bed, Jesse finally told her about the battles he'd survived, the friends he'd lost, the guilt that gnawed at him for making it home when so many others hadn't. Clara listened without judgment, and when he finished, she took his hand, rough and scarred, and held it in both of hers, and said that surviving wasn't a sin, it was a second chance, and second chances were meant to be lived, not wasted on shame. That was the night everything changed between them, not with grand declarations, but with a quiet understanding that passed between two wounded people who had found, almost by accident, a reason to keep going. The marriage that had begun as a business arrangement, a desperate solution to save a farm from foreclosure, slowly became something neither of them had dared to hope for. Jesse stopped sleeping in the barn. The bank stopped sending letters, because the debts were being paid, the harvest was strong, and the farm that had been dying under the weight of grief was breathing again under the weight of partnership. Winter came again, the third since Thomas had passed, but this time the house was warm with more than just the fireplace. There was laughter at the table, there were 4 voices instead of 3, and there was a man who had once believed he had nothing left to offer the world, discovering that he had everything a struggling family needed all along: steady hands, a patient heart, and the willingness to stay. Clara often thought back to that first morning, to the desperate words she'd spoken to a bloodied stranger at her gate, and she marveled at how something born from necessity had grown into something that looked, unmistakably, like love. If this story touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you that broken people can heal each other, that a second chance can bloom into something beautiful, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might need this story today. Your support means the world to us here at Golden Outlaw Tales. And before we close, we have one special request. Tell us in the comments what part of Jesse and Clara's story moved you the most. Was it the fence he mended without being asked, or the night she held his hand and told him surviving wasn't a sin? We read every single comment, and we'd love to hear from you. By spring, the fence lines were straight, the fields were green, and the farm that had nearly been lost to grief and debt stood as a testament to what 2 broken people could build when they chose, every single day, to stay. Jesse Calloway had ridden onto that land looking for a job, and instead, he found a family, a purpose, and a woman who had seen past his scars to the good man underneath. Some love stories begin with romance. Theirs began with survival, and grew into something far more lasting. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.